So thank you both for being here. It's great that we can do this online despite everything that's going on at a time like this. So I've looked at your campaign and I've seen like a few of the goals that you have that you want to achieve during the next 80 days. And I have a few questions about where you're heading with these goals. So firstly, I want you to speak a little bit about what you think are the problems in the current student government. This is just like a general question. What do you think like is prevalent or you see more often with the administration in the student government we have right now?
I think like I can answer on this because like I was an assistant director for the SLR committee in student government for the academic year. So like I feel like although there's a lot of like good points on our student government. For example, we organize a lot of events and like we made a lot of changes in the past year. But I think that there's a lot of like space for improvement that we can still do. For example, if you can see from our our election right now, there's actually no candidates running for 3 committees, which is Student Organization Committee, SOC, and then the second one is Student Events Committee, and Student Wellness Committee. So I think like as you can see, like 2 of the committees that are like empty, that don't have candidates running, are actually really important committees for student government. So student events and student organizations, they actually handle a lot of stuff and have one of the biggest responsibilities in all student government committees. So like what I've noticed in the past year is that, especially in student organization committee, is that only the director is working, and like a lot of the assistant directors, I feel like they don't have much stake in whatever that's taking place in student government. So they didn't put in much effort into resolving issues, into helping the committee function as a whole. So that's why like there has been a lot of pressure on a lot of tasks, a lot of workload with the directors of student organization committee, SOC, Leo, like if you know him. So that's why like nobody take up that responsibility, because everyone just feel like there's just so much workload. So I think like what we can do to improve in the future is that we can give much more work, delegate much more tasks to like assistant directors, and then like increase their stake in general assembly as well. Let them contribute to issues that we have, and like generally just let them speak out more. So like they feel much more involved, and they feel like there's an incentive for them to contribute much more to our initiatives and so on. And as for student events, they have a few members in their committees, and the same happened to it. Like there's just too much workload. That's why like nobody is really willing to like take up that responsibility. I heard from their members just now that they said that they see how their directors are like struggling to like keep together all the workload, and that's just a lot of workload, honestly. So like what I thought about is that we can have much more collaborations, cross-departmental collaborations in student government, so that student events committee doesn't have to do all the events by themselves. They can delegate some, and then collaborate on some with student life and residence committee, SLR, and then collaborate on some with external relations as well, and then collaborate on some with global affairs as well, because like those other committees, they actually don't have much workload. So if they have like empty spaces in their schedules, I think like we should definitely work together as a student government much better and have much more collaborations instead of just handling the stuff in their own committees. Like that's one of the changes I want to make in the future.
Okay, so you think like distribution of workload is definitely an issue that's been more prevalent in the student government right now. That's what you've been talking about. Okay, cool. What other important issues do you think the student body is facing right now in NYU Shanghai's community? I think you've talked a little bit about how you want to introduce a more flexible textbook policy. You want to implement a less restrictive core curriculum. I think that's a huge issue for people. Core curriculum wise, I know that being a senior during my time at NYU Shanghai, there's not just been issues with as like the language barriers, of course, not for me personally, but I've seen my friends struggle with, for example, EAP requirements and like Chinese language requirements for international students. But then there's also other curriculum requirements that have become a lot more stringent in terms of what can meet that requirement. So for example, the algorithmic thinking requirement is now cut down to like only 2 subjects. ICP, I think, is like the only thing left that you can use to complete that requirement. Whereas for me, I took a course called Business Analytics, which used to count for algorithmic thinking. So I got saved. But for students that perhaps don't have as much of an interest in those subjects or are not as good skill-wise, are not able to adapt to those subjects, how would you be able to help that in terms of the core curriculum? How do you think that you can bring changes to, as you pointed out yourself, you want to make changes to how students can meet those requirements?
Right. I actually it was me who like worried a lot about the core curriculum issue, and I suggested this to Lucas when we were working on the manifesto. And I actually want to add one point to the problem of core curriculum, which is the number, because right now I noticed that we have to take up to 11 courses for the current freshmen to fill out the core curriculum, whereas the current seniors might I think they only have 10 like 10 courses to fulfill. So like I noticed the school is potentially adding up this kind of requirement while also limiting the courses that students can take. So we're actually working on the promotion of like negotiating with the school to add up more like how to say, we noticed that there are A-level scores, AP scores, and IB scores that can potentially fulfill some and we want to implement a policy that can also allow the subject scores from the college admission test from Chinese students to let them fulfill some core curriculum, because I personally encountered this problem because the core curriculum is too many for me to complete a potential double major. So yeah, we think this is the way, like we add more ways to potentially fulfill the requirements.
Okay, but like
just to expand on what Scofield said.
Yeah, sorry, Lucas, go ahead. Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just to expand on what Scofield say, we intend to combine the algorithmic thinking, and then ED and STS into 2 courses, so that people should do 2 courses, out of the combination of 3 courses. And then we have done some research on, College of Arts and Science CAS in New York and NYU Abu Dhabi, because we think that those 2 colleges are the most similar ones to NYU Shanghai that we're in right now. And CAS actually have requirements of 36 credits of courses for their core requirement, and Abu Dhabi only has 24 hours of credit requirements for their core courses. While Shanghai, we have 40 credits hours of core requirement, and we have even much more if you add up our language courses and so on. So that we think that there's definitely a lot that we can make improvements in, and just to streamline the requirements a lot across all the different global sites, so that I think it's fairer to NYU Shanghai students as well, and especially the Chinese students. They have faced a lot of difficulties when it comes to double majoring, because they have to fulfill that EAP requirement, while international students can, still can waive off some subjects with their AP scores, or if you have fluency in Chinese, you can still waive some core requirements off. So yeah, that's where we intend to start from, and we'll see how we can if we can decrease more credit hours besides just combining the 3 requirements, and we'll see how yeah, that's where we intend to start.
Yeah, and also yeah, cool.
Sorry, go ahead. No, first it's fine. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Also, I want to add one point to Chinese students, because I definitely would say the school needs more research on the traditional Chinese high school education, because for one particular core requirement I noticed is called experiential discovery. Actually, I noticed a lot of Chinese students who try to fulfill this for their first semester by taking courses like foundations of chemistry, foundations of physics. They didn't feel any pressure with this course, and they just didn't go to lectures because that's something they learned in freshman year of high school, and that's just very basic knowledge for them. So like, I don't think it is potentially necessary for a lot of Chinese students from science background in their high school to fill this corporate curriculum.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. I also think like I'm not sure, but how that would play out, because also I think it's already been very divisive with like the EAP requirements for Chinese students and like the international students not having to take the same requirements. I'm not sure because I think one of the bigger goals of um I think the campaign, or like being part of student government, one of the bigger issues that we all face right now is how to bond the Chinese and international community a lot more than it has been, because I think that there is definitely a divide that we are trying to sort of block in a way. We're trying to like make it so that it's a bridge the gap in a certain way. And I think that maybe those requirements, how would you think those would play out in terms of not partially recognizing one sort of community over the other, because that they could run the risk of doing that. I mean, I do think that Chinese students need to have like a more comprehensive education because of the fact that they are sort of a little bit more discouraged in terms of pursuing their passion, I think, for in terms of the EAP requirements, for example, which may block them from doing so. Some students even have like better English, I think, than native speakers who are Chinese, and they've still been required to do the EAP requirement. But how do you think you would navigate that in terms of not being careful that the policies don't cause the community to become more divisive?
I think like that's a very good point to like point. That's a very good thing to point out. And I think that generally EAP, like I have not like. Do you want to expand on like how effective do you think EAP is at improving your English? Maybe Scofield, you can expand on it. Do you think it's effective?
Um, Personally, I don't think it's as effective as I imagined it would be before I entered college. But I do think there is one strategy that the school is currently conducting, which is the exemption of EAP courses. But I don't think it's very complete. Like it's not a very like transparent system to students because I was trying so hard to place out of or like exempt from EAP, but I didn't manage to because I know like the process was like the professor has to recommend some students in his class, and then probably like the EAP faculty will go to ask all the professors that are currently teaching that student to know more about their English ability and then to make the decision. But I do think like for some courses like GPS recitation, sometimes students don't have a lot of ideas to address in the course, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their English ability like is not there. So I do think like, for example, some language proficiency tests, like IELTS or TOEFL, if the students have once taken that, or like some other like strategies we can work on with the EOP faculty to better assess the overall ability of a student's language ability. Like that may work out. Like we have to try like say to let most students to take EAP courses only for once, so that leaves more space for them to discover other subjects in their freshman year. Because I noticed like for EAP and writing and GPS, these three core courses are the one that students are stressed out most in their first year.
Yeah, no, for sure. I also think though that it's very important to take into consideration the inclusivity factor, because I think a lot of international students, for example, would feel the same way about math. I know that there's a lot of students who come from, for example, a US-based education system. And I'm not saying that that education system might be less rigorous or anything, but at the same time, like I think in terms of maths or sciences, as you brought up yourself, Chinese students or people from a more Asian background may be able to cope with those kind of courses better because of like how they've been brought up, how they've been taking classes in their local schools or government schools. So I think that that angle could also be taken into consideration, given the fact that like it's not just Chinese, again, like Chinese students that are going through like the issues with,
Yes, definitely.
then also international students who are going through other struggles with other courses as well. But that's the thing, I think striking the balance between rigor and comfort is like going to be very difficult for courses that they're commonly taking. Okay, cool. So thank
I
you.
think like
Yeah.
do you mind if I expand on that a little
No,
bit?
go ahead, go
I
ahead.
think like a lot of the things that you pointed out, like for example, like the issues with our academics in NYU Shanghai, and that's why like we want to create an academics affairs department in student government. That's in our 80 days promises, is because that we find that a lot of these issues doesn't, a lot of these issues, academic issues, often go unnoticed, and a lot of students always complain about it, but like never really there's any action really taken. So we want to like establish this academics affairs department so that we can collect data and specific opinions on how we can improve our systems from students who experience it, so that we can improve it for the next coming class of 2024 and so on.
I was actually just going to get to that. Perfect. I was going to ask about what you meant by an academic affairs department. And also, I know that previously, even if like the efforts have not gone through, I know that the student government has tried to work with the Academic Resource Center and faculty to come up with maybe better plans for students in terms of how the requirements should be met. And study away is also a big thing because there's so many majors that you are unable to fulfill the requirements for at NYU Shanghai, and you have to get the courses approved. I know for me personally, I had to get 3 or 4 courses approved for my major, which were not in the list previously. So could you talk a little bit about like the specific things you can do to get through maybe a little bit of the bureaucracy or like the sort of intrinsic administrative issues that you'll come across with the academic affairs department? I mean, what would this department specifically work towards, and how do you think that you'd be able to communicate better with them if you have this sort of new department added to your government?
I think like a lot of I'm not sure how the previous administration handled with the previous student government handled with the school administration, but we think that having an academics affairs department, where like what is most important, like in giving you like the speaking position, and like the way to make changes in our academic systems is that if you have only the data and represent the data that's representative of the student population. So that's why we think that academics affairs department, like generally we will be much more data focused, and we'll be much more like commit to our surveys on like what people think and like how people like functions. And like I know that this academics affairs departments, they also gives out like surveys on midterms and so on, but like they never really publish any reports on like what their surveys found, and like it's never really communicated to the students. So like one thing that we could do also is that we establish a connection with the academics affairs departments in NYU Shanghai, and then gather some findings from their midterms report and so on, midterm surveys and so on, and then communicate it to the students. So like I think like communication in part is very important, and like that's what academics affairs would do in general. Communications and like helping them to like implement students' feedback.
I think
Yeah, and I also think
yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
sorry, and I also think the academic the academic affairs department is also part of our like one of our broader initiatives, which is to like bridge the gap between the like a university leadership, like policies and students, because I noticed a lot of students, they keep complaining about the textbook policy, the core curriculum, but the school did not at all respond to them. Like the school did not explain why the policy is like this for a lot of years.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think the student government should take the responsibility to let the students know why the policy looks like this and why it hasn't been solved for so many years. So like that gets more students to think deeper into this topic and to cooperate with the student government for more potential solutions instead of just complaining about it or just like, yeah.
Okay, yeah, great. Have you also thought about maybe advisors? Because I know that a lot of students are not happy as much with their advisors and like how they've contributed to their sort of academics. I know you guys are like freshmen, so I guess it's only been a year for you in this whole thing, but I know that for me and quite a few juniors as well, it's been relatively you know, topsy-turvy with like how advisors have contributed to our education. I think that enrollment, as soon as enrollment sweeps in, like they tend to like get more fast paced. Like you have to like enroll for courses, you have to give them course selections, you have to get approved by your advisor and all of those things. But before that enrollment process and after that enrollment process, whatever goes on could be very low lying. There's not much of like a communication again between the advisor and the student. Like sort of decisions that the student wants to make about their career, about maybe the resources that they need, or like what major they should pursue. I think a lot of the advisors are also like subject-based specific. So uh, they've like had like sort of like business and marketing or business and finance specialists as an advisor or whatever. But then for social science students or for somebody that's doing like more of an arts related, liberal arts related major, it's harder for them to associate with that. So what do you think about the advisor situation in terms of academic affairs, and how would you, you know, sort of bridge the communication gap, as you said, with that?
Like for me, like personally, I don't have much information on like how advisors and students function, so I can't say much on that issue. But like, and like, I believe that our academics affairs department can't touch into every single academics, like every single advisor relation as well, because there will be a lot of things to handle. But what we can do is that we can make a suggestion to the academics affairs department to like implement like a revision of advisor-advisee relations at the end of maybe at the end of sophomore year or at the end of freshman year. So like to see whether your major still aligns with the advisor that you have right now. I think at the end of sophomore year is a better solution. Is a better solution. So like, and then we can also help academic affairs department to implement maybe a policy that enables students to apply for a switch of advisor during their first 2 years in NYU Shanghai, so freshman and sophomore year. But we can't, like as academic affairs department, like we can't really touch into every single advisor-advisee relations. But like we will do what we can do.
Yeah, and honestly, yes, Lucas and I didn't have a lot of information about academic advice in this part. But one thing when I was hearing your question, one thing I just came up to my mind is that because I worked in career development center for the whole freshman year, and I know the system like the CDC, they have this career coaching appointments, and that makes me think like a potential like new way of making an appointment with both the career coach and the academic advisor, because I think that different academic advisors from our school, they have different major focuses. So some students may change their academic advisor based on their major choice after sophomore year or something like that. So it is it might work that if the students can schedule appointment with the advisor that has his interested major as well as the career coach, and they talk together so that they the two coaches advisors offer comprehensive ideas like related to academics as well as career path. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Also, Lucas, the point you brought up about sophomore year, the advisor changing, that's already a thing. So like if you declare a major, like if you declare your major in sophomore year, for example, it's going to automatically change your advisor depending on like if you change your route, you know, like if I had, for example, I initially had a business and finance sort of centered advisor, specific advisor, but then I changed my route to social science. So my advisor automatically changed as soon as I declared my major. But I think it's also that you guys are like, I guess it develops over time. So maybe it's, you're just both really new to this right now. I guess like later on, like once you experience more with advisors, you'll get a more of a sense that people are having issues with that in certain specific areas as well. Yeah, okay. Moving on to, I think you all are focusing a lot on academics, which I really like because there's so much work to do like in regards to academia at our school?
Like for me, like personally, last semester I had ICP and we had to purchase the textbook starting with Python, and we never really opened the book once, in the whole semester. So like it's pretty much just a waste of a few, almost 1,000 kwai. So what we think is that we can do similar things that is happening in other global sites right now, and in NYU New York, which we can make textbook policies optional. So like make most of the textbooks optional. And I think like if it is required, it's the students' responsibility to obtain them. And because I think a lot of times like students know how to get the textbook, and like most of the times that the textbooks can be shared as well. So like 3 students or like 4 students, they could just share on the textbook and like obtain the materials when they need from one another. And this can definitely save a lot of resources and like the money that's put towards textbook. And especially with the economic impact of COVID-19 right now hitting pretty much every single student on campus, we think that such a strict and wasteful textbook policy should be avoided for sure. So yeah, I think like we could consider like how they're doing it in NYU New York and London, and like basically make textbooks optional. And if there are required textbooks, make sure that one students can share with other students as well, maybe like 5-to-1 textbook ratio and so on, because we think that students generally have the responsibility themselves to obtain the textbook.
And also, I would also say like the university should contact more, like communicate more with the relevant professors, because the professor knows how much the textbook is going to be used during this course. So like if the professor really requires a textbook, the university might maintain the current textbook policy for that particular course. But for a lot of courses, the professor the professor has more like a clear vision of how students might use the textbook. So the professor can be the person to decide whether this current textbook policy is going to be implemented with that course.
I also think like, I mean, you guys both raised important points, but I also think the textbook policies is very much related to why there's so much frustration with students, is because the costs, the expenses that are associated with buying so many textbooks. I mean, I know students that have had to pay like 500 RMB for just one book, which is a crazy amount when you think about the fact that we're paying so much for like an international education. Have you thought about funding and expenses in that sense, not just for the textbook policy, but just in general? Do you think that the school needs to give more funds to students? Do you think that the school needs to change its funding policies in terms of how much students are able to afford the resources that the school's giving? I think we pay for a lot of things in addition to just the tuition, like as you see with the textbook policy, how funding is an issue, how it's so costly and expensive for students to afford that. I think there's many other spheres as well of being at NYU Shanghai or being an NYU Shanghai student that incurs quite a few costs. I mean, I guess housing and stuff, we're not as well funded or well equipped as NYU Abu Dhabi would be, like in terms of how many stipend they give to their students and things. But at the same time, like, do you think that the school needs to maybe be more generous with the resources that they're providing to the students? And how much of it is it a student responsibility to pay for these resources if they're paying for such an expensive education?
I think that this is definitely an issue that concerns a lot of students, and particularly like among students who come from middle and low income countries, like basically us. Like cost is definitely a huge issue, and I think that there's definitely like a point that students and the school administration will feel comfortable like with the cost of studying in NYU Shanghai and like how generous the school is at allocating funds. But like we don't have a lot of the data right now, so we can't really have a conclusive answer again to your question. But like if we have more data and if we have more surveys from students, and we can obtain more information from the school administration as well, like how does the funding goes across the school, and like how each department is allocated, how much funds, and like how those funds are being used, we can definitely like sort out, maybe a more efficient way of distributing the resources and like decrease the burden on the students as well. But like for as of right now, we can't have a conclusive say because we don't have the information.
Okay. What about in terms of you, then if we move on outside of the academic sphere, more towards like other things that students experience on campus? You talk a little bit about meal plans and how you want to change like the Chinese sort of offerings that are in the cafeteria. What feedback system would you kind of take for associating like communication, like for communication to happen between students and like what they're looking for in terms of food that they're eating every day? I know that's been a problem in the past as well, with students trying to navigate their way through like Sproutworks, like a new vendor that's come, and like the expenses and again the costs of the food have gone up a little bit because of the quality of the food, which has been raised, which inevitably would happen. But how would you increase the sort of feedback system or like the cooperation between the faculty members who are working, the staff who's working in B1 or like part of Sproutworks, and the student body?
I think like we give a lot of thought on this issue as well, because the food in cafeteria is always like one of the biggest issues that's happening on our campus. So we actually gave a lot of thought on it, and like we know that there's been a lot of issues with different vendors in the past. NYU Shanghai has changed a lot of vendors, and because of the market size of NYU Shanghai, a lot of vendors are they're reluctant as well to take up NYU Shanghai, because we are switching campus as well very soon. So like what we are planning to do, first of all, is there's definitely a lot of changes that can be made to the Chinese cuisine section, and a lot of students have feedback to us that it's very often it's more oily and salty, and it's not really representative of the general Chinese cuisine. So we will make it a starting point, and right now like although Sproutworks, they have their own feedback system, but generally, if you go onto their feedback system, there's very little space which you can expand on your opinion, and it's very dysfunctional because there's no accountability on that. There's no one regularly checks on that, and so on. So like we will try to like implement if a student feedback system that will differentiates different sections of Sproutworks. So whether you're talking about the Chinese food section, Western food section, the breakfast or dinner, and so on, and then we'll try to implement a feedback system, and that student government have access to, and Sproutworks has access to, so that we can meet with Sproutworks occasionally, like maybe regularly, like once every 2 weeks, to like talk about what if students have faced any issues with their cuisine, and then try to make changes accordingly with their cuisine. And that's what the meal plan that you were talking about. We are planning to collect more data from the students with the feedback system, and then ask them about like what they think about like what is the reasonable price. Do you think is for a meal plan, for monthly meal plan, or a semester-based meal plan? Like how much would you go into, like how much would you contribute to have such a meal plan, and so on, and then negotiate with Sproutworks to like strike a sweet point, so that by having a meal plan, I think that Sproutworks can definitely increase their revenue, because that right now a lot of students on campus, they are ordering from different vendors on Ulama, or they're going out of campus to Shoujoabing or like the malls around school to like have lunch or dinner instead of staying in our school cafeteria, because that very much often they just don't prefer the food there, and like they don't have, and like the cost there is like quite high, is high compared to other is high compared to Shoujoabing and like Family Mart food and so on. So like we can definitely implement a meal plan, and then like improve the taste of the food as well, because I think this is an incentive for Sproutworks as well to like increase their revenue. So I think like there's definitely like by having more data from students, we can definitely like make improvements on this. And then if we have a meal plan, we can potentially decrease the amount of deliveries that's used by the students as well, which will increase the environmental, which will increase the environmental friendly status of our campus. And generally, there's just a lot of improvements that can be made on this area. And if we have more data, we are very confident that we can accomplish this, promises.
Yeah, and also in the case of certain food, we would also like to, I know it be a long and complicated process, but works to do like a lot of experiments. Like they change their recipe, for example, like for one, and on that particular day, we encourage all students to dine in the cafeteria and provide if sufficient feedbacks for this kind of recipe. And then after, like say a whole semester, we would know like how Scofield can use like the recipes that best fit the students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you guys spoke a little bit about the feedback system. So I think there's been like a food committee that has been organizing things to improve communication between like Sproutworks or whatever vendor we have and the student body and faculty and whoever has complaints about the food that's being served. But at the same time, do you think that there needs to be some sort of implementation of like more immediate feedback system, as in like you literally like when you're there and you're like ordering food or something and you don't like it, you can directly go and tell them and like report it immediately? Because I think that what tends to happen is that there's like a sort of like lapse, like a time lapse between like what's been eaten and like what's been like said about the food, like the complaint. I think in addition to it having like a more of an effect when you're immediately having the food, it's also that like the time lapse causes change to be like slow down, like it's a lot slowed down, like it's a lot more less achievable if you let it kind of seep into the semester, like it's, if the feedback is like immediate, then people are going to act on it immediately. So have you guys thought a little bit about like how you want to make that into effect, how you want the system to be a lot more smoothened in terms of how quickly the feedback is taken in?
I think like what you mean is that I think like what we can do is that we would check on the feedbacks, like the feedbacks that we get from the Google Forms or like the feedback system that we have regularly. And like I'm not sure what you're trying to point towards, but like what we would do is that we'll establish the feedback system and have a QR code on every single table on cafeteria, so that when people are eating, when people have problems, immediately they can just use their phone and then scan on the tables and then like boom, like feedback, and then like give opinions on like what they think about the food. And then because I think like we can have regular meetings either in person or through WeChat or Zoom with the cafeteria management and so on. So like that's like one way, like by having regular meetings we can sort out their concerns every single 2 weeks and so on. So I think the time lapse wouldn't be very much of a problem.
Okay, cool. What about other initiatives? I mean, you've already spoken about the things that I've pointed out in the campaign. What other things are you thinking about? Lastly, this is the last question, about in terms of, I guess, things like inclusivity within the community, as I brought up with the Chinese and international students, or events that you think that we need. For example, student government, I know in the past it does very few events in 1 year on my watch, I think. Personally, I think it's done like Dumpling Fest and like a few other events, and that partially could be related to funding as well and like time constraints. But what other things do you think you would be able to bring to the table as if the government is run under you?
I think like in general, like we will have much more collaboration with the different departments in the school. For example, we will collaborate much more with student life and the athletics and health committee. So for example, in our manifesto, we talk about running an NYU Shanghai Olympics. And I think like that can be generally, could be collaborated with the athletics and health committee to like organize games in, soccer or futsal or badminton and basketball and so on. So like by having that, I think like it's more efficient because there's a staff member that's guiding you to organize all that, and by having more collaboration with the committees can help you can increase your capacity of organizing events much more. And also we encourage much more cross collaboration, cross departmental collaboration in student government as general. So like we can utilize the resources, the manpower in departments that often don't have much jobs to like organize different events, initiatives as well. So like that's one way as well that we will increase the capacity of organizing events in student government next year.
Okay, Scofield, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's basically our thoughts with the manifesto about events, because I didn't work in the student government this year, so I didn't have like a very clear idea to, but I think Lucas has provided a lot of points. We'll keep thinking about that, like when the semester starts.
Yeah, also you two are both very young to be taking on this position, I think, especially because you're like very fresh into the school. So I think a lot of the school systems and stuff will unravel themselves while you are taking on these positions. But at the same time, I wanted to talk a little bit lastly about like, what kind of experience do you think you have that you can bring to this position? Why are you both so confident that you are able to contribute to the student government in some way, with only being at this institution for less than a year as of now?
Personally, because I'm working in the career development center, but previously I didn't notice anyone from the student government that has this experience of career development center. So I think as for me, I'm able to be the person to, as we address the manifesto, to bring more corporate presence to the campus, because I don't think a lot of students are clear about what CDC really has to offer. And we sort of, on behalf of student government, we can introduce like CDC more to the student body to get them know like they're actually able to plan their career very ahead of time, and they can make career coach appointments, and like the on-campus recruitment can be larger than it already is right now. So I think these are some of the aspects that I am confident about and also professional about. Yeah.
Lucas, what do you think about like, again, the same question, but in a sense, like I think bringing in like your own talents and like experience from the past is a lot more important, and to attract people to that is a lot more important to win votes this time around, given that you're very new to the whole school. How do you think you're doing that, and how do you think your experiences of the past can add to this position?
I think that we know like a lot of people out there, they have like doubts on us because like, basically I think we are the only combination out there. We are one of the two combinations out there, one of the two pair of candidates out there that are formed purely by freshmen. So, and in our manifesto, we didn't talk much about experience. So like, that's definitely a very good question to ask. And I think like, although like we had very little experience in NYU Shanghai, in my past semester, I've been working a lot on student life and residence, working with public safety to implement a real-time bus schedule, implement a real-time bus tracking systems to like improve our bus schedules. And I've personally worked on different issues as well. For example, increasing the bus schedules during exam periods, so that people can go back when they study late in campus. And I think last semester we managed to bring it, our latest bus, going back from University to Jinqiao is at 12:05 a.m. And we also worked on, opening up classes till late in campus to accommodate students who are studying late for their exams, for their midterms and finals. And that's like what we have done in the past. And personally, before I came to NYU Shanghai, I did my A-levels Sunway College. It's a college of around, with a student population of around 10,000. It's much larger than NYU Shanghai. and I had much more experience doing that as well. For example, and we collaborated a lot with NGOs and brought a lot of NGOs from our local communities to campus, and I think it was a really successful one. And then personally, I also worked as director of student welfare in our student council, which is like the student government. So we work a lot of on different issues as well. And I find a lot of like different issues that can be seen in my college back then. I find them very similar, like I find very similar issues coming back in NYUSH Shanghai as well. So for example, like the space concerns, and then accommodation concerns, and then opening up classes to accommodate students because like libraries is full and so on. Like those are like the issues that I encountered back then in my college, and I think that I have a lot of experience on handling them already. So I think that handling these issues, I will definitely I would definitely have.
Yeah, I guess that would definitely help. I mean, having experience like going through it, like all the administrative sort of responsibilities in your previous school and things like that would definitely bring to this school. And I don't think that age is that much of a limit to at what you guys can do for the school. So thank you so much for your time. I wish you all the best of luck with this campaign. I hope that your experience proves worthy of everything and that you get a lot of votes.